Hey guys, welcome to the Lunge and Lift podcast. Today we've got a great episode on X common coaching mistakes. We haven't decided how many we're going to do, but we will add it into the title when we're finished recording. Over our careers, we've seen a lot of good and bad coaching, and we thought it would be a great podcast to talk through the trends that we've seen between good coaches, the things to avoid for bad coaches. So even if you are not a coach, it's something you can look for when you're picking who to work with. So hopefully it appeals to all of our listeners. But before we get into it, this episode is sponsored by the Training Stimulus. By the time this episode airs, we will be into taking applications for the next round of the mentorship. Please submit an application if you're interested at thetrainingstimulus.com. Please also check out our website, lungeandlift.com. We're constantly updating it with good stuff and our deadlift accessory download. If you want to improve your deadlift, hopefully there's some ideas you haven't thought of before. And as always, a big thank you to the show sponsors, Wit Fitness, wit-fitness.com, where we have a discount code for our listeners, LL15, and also Hydro, our blood flow restriction partner. Use discount code LL20 to get 20% off their products. Right, let's get into it.
Yeah. So common coaching mistakes. For me, when you said about using this topic, I absolutely love this because where I've been through a variety of roles within the fitness industry, from being front of house, so not even being a PT, and watching PTs and watching other people do the job that I wanted to do, all the way through up to being a head coach and actually having a team of coaches underneath me, to then being a freelance coach and like being able to be solely responsible for everything you do. It's been a really interesting journey to watch others and take in, and also kind of and look at my own journey and see how much I've developed over the years. And definitely when I was a head coach at Virgin, that I saw so many different interpretations of how to coach people, and which is great. That's the individual side of coaching. And for me, I think there are some basic principles that, like with everything, that you kind of need to go through and make sure that you understand. But there's definitely an arch in this, where I think, like with most things, where you go from one extreme to the other, that when you start out coaching, you're not necessarily confident. You might think you are, but you're not really that confident. So you might not be actually that engaged because you're just not sure. And then when you're in that middle period, where the stage where you're either going to stay and become a long-term PT, or you're going to drop out of the industry, you either think you know everything. You're like, yeah, I'm like Mr. Big Boss. I can do everything. I'm the best. And then actually, when you realize you're not, and you come out the other side, and then you've been in it for a long time, like yourself and myself, you start to realize that actually we could do a little bit less, and that ends up giving more. And I think, number one on our list of common coaching mistakes is overqueuing. And I think I'm a huge culprit of this, because for me, as you might tell, I love talking. And I love to give as much information to all my clients as possible. So I give. And then sometimes I have to then say, wait, do this. And I have to then summarize everything I've just said with like 3 words. You do it to me all the time. So in the podcast, which is great. We talk and you go, do you mean progressive overload? I'm like, yes. So
yeah, I think that's a great one to start with. And I can't remember what it's called, but there's a famous law or principle for contrasting what you know versus what you think you know. And basically over time, you obviously learn more and more and more. But in your journey as a coach, you probably think you know nothing, and then in that middle patch you're talking about, you think you know everything, and then you sort of get through that and realize that you actually know very little, even though the total amount of knowledge is greater. And I think overqueuing is one of the things that's massively to do with that phenomenon, where at the start you have a few cues available and you've only got so many tools in your toolbox for how to get somebody to move better. And then as you've seen more bodies, you've worked with more people, you've got more and more cues, and you're then almost desperate to prove that you know so much. So you want to be able to communicate that to your client, that I've seen 10 different faults in what you're doing. But there's a couple of reasons why that's not great. One is that the athlete or client feels like they're failing and that they're shit at the movement because you've pointed out 10 things that they aren't doing right. But also from a movement point of view, the movement becomes very disjointed. You can't think about timing 10 different components of the movement. Movement should be fluid and smooth, and the body as a system likes to coordinate in a very fluid way, and the way that we can optimize that is by focusing on an external cue rather than an internal cue. So the difference between those is that an external cue is something outside of your body, an internal cue is something within your body. So it's the difference between driving your hips forwards versus squeezing your ass or contracting your glutes. And internal cues, like the mind muscle connection, has a role in bodybuilding when you're trying to grow one specific muscle. But in terms of performance or functional movement, our body achieves tasks in space. So when you're going to pick up a glass, you're not thinking about using your anterior delt, your tricep, your forearm. Like you just think about, I'm going to grab that. And that should be the same for all sporting movements, for all functional movements. We're just trying to achieve gross overall tasks in space. So for that reason, as few cues as possible should always be the goal. If somebody can just sit down, stand up, and they have a perfect squat, then don't change it. Don't ask them to do anything different unless there's a really good reason to do so.
Yeah, you'll start to notice that, especially when you then start adding load. And then you start to see where they break down. So understanding what it is that you're going to say to help them improve. Because at the end of the day, if they're squatting pretty much perfectly, leave them be and let them keep moving, because they'll feel like they're achieving more. And I think it was when I started CrossFit coaching, was when I really, really took in that thing of understanding, look at what's the one thing that could really help. Because when you're coaching multiple people, it's like 15 to 30 people, you haven't got time to tell everyone everything. And you also need to look at who's a disaster. So who needs your help now? And they're going to hurt themselves. And you've got to quickly prioritize across, which is why I think like the warm-up part of the class, and even in sessions and stuff, when as a personal trainer, you probably similar, that you use the warm-up to kind of gauge the person that's in front of you today. So that might be they've had a really stressful day at work, so maybe they're not going to be able to hit exactly everything on the program that you planned. Or it might be that they're feeling pumped and you might actually need to maybe not hold them back a little bit, but think, okay, cool, they're going to really want to push here. So I've got to look out for maybe a bit of an overexcited individual. And you need to look at everything and use the warm-up to essentially gauge to see who do I need to give my most energy to. And then like scale it down accordingly. And then with the cueing side of stuff is then you say, right, I'm going to go over to this person that looks a bit of a disaster and say, right, what is the one thing that they can do? But you're not going to say to them, right, I'm going to give you like this one thing, but you've got loads wrong with you, but I'm only going to give you one. You're going to say, mate, you look great. Like, how about try this one. Like, because especially if someone is a bit of a train wreck, you really want them to feel as good as possible when they're moving, because they are most likely trying so hard. And that's the thing. When someone's trying, you want to harness that and you want them to use that effort, because that effort multiplies and compounds so much. Because if they see a little bit of improvement, just imagine you give someone that is doing something pretty badly, one little thing, and they suddenly feel better. They're like, this guy or girl knows exactly what they're doing. Oh, I love this. I feel better. And they just want to keep coming back for more and more. And
Totally agree. I think especially for beginners, keeping them in success, that feeling that they're doing it right is really, really important. It's only when you get to really advanced athletes that you're working on the minutiae and the real finer pointers of technique that the feedback style, I think, can change, because they are highly competitive and looking for absolute edges and generally perfectionists. So in those situations, a little bit more technical cueing is helpful, or has a place, and it is very individual specific. I'd say that everyone has their own personality style that they like to be communicated through. So bearing that in mind, whether you use criticism or praise and all those sorts of things, I think is another factor to build in.
Or the classic shit sandwich, which are always there. I'm always like, that was such a good squat. I bet you really felt that there. I'll tell you what though, try this one little bit here, But then don't forget, you keep that other bit in. Like, you got to make sure it's good, bad, because at the end of the day, as I said, you want to keep that energy moving forward. You want to make sure that that person feels like they're getting better, because that's why they're there to train. And I think I really like what you said there about you got to understand the level of the client that's in front of you, that they most likely, unless they're a high level athlete, they most likely don't need to be absolutely perfect. They just need to not be getting hurt. And that is, I think, when that was around my middle PT career, where I was looking so much on technique and really trying to break down my own stuff, other people's stuff, and really like looking at everything. And I realized a lot of the time that it was like, actually keep it simple, because that was when someone's deadlifting, I don't need to be telling them, right, you're going to feel this, because they just don't care. And that's the thing, it's you're the one that needs to care. But you need to be able to then simplify that to the point of saying to them, right, you're going to feel this in the back of your body, right? You're going to feel it in your glutes. You might feel a little bit of lower back because you're getting stimulated here. So don't stress that too much, but move with it and make sure the priority of the movement is going to be coming from that lower body. You're going to feel it there. Oh yeah, I felt that there. Sweet. Then move on. That's the thing. It is funny because I feel as a coach, I have a big passion towards doing it right, rather than just doing it. So it's really hard to kind of, for me, that over-cueing thing, for me, this is such as I said at the start, it's a passionate one for me, because I know I over-cue, and I still do. But it's just because I'm so passionate trying to help you get it right. Yeah. And it's something that, as a coach, I'm still working on. And that's 10 years later. That's 10 years later. But a lot of time it is just passion.
Yeah, I think one of the phrases I think we've said before on the podcast that I really like here is good enough is good enough. And if it's achieving the training stimulus that you want and the body is getting the reason for adaptation in the right direction, then it's a successful exercise. If it doesn't look, picture perfect and, there's something non-ideal going on, that doesn't mean it's not moving you in the right direction. And I think, it's a common feeling amongst coaches of they want everything to be perfect, and they can spend too much time and energy squeezing out the last iota of perfection, when actually, if it's good enough, it's moving well enough, the right stimulus is being achieved, then that's it.
Yeah, and I think from a client perspective, how this can apply to you is, if you find your coach is maybe just telling you too much and you feel a little bit like you don't know what to even start with, tell them. Because a lot of the time, it might be that they're peacocking and trying to tell you everything to show you, oh, I know everything. But then, or you might be someone like me. To be honest with you, I don't care if you think I know everything. I just hope that I'm helping you and I'm trying to find it. And sometimes I get lost in my own world, and I'm just trying to. And a good example is my client Sue. PT session yesterday with her, and deadlifting. We don't normally deadlift with a bar because we do it over Zoom, and she's at home. She's got a barbell, but it's like one of those 1-inch barbells, doesn't touch the floor, stuff like that. So whenever we get the chance, we deadlift with a barbell because she really enjoys that. But she's mastered the kettlebell deadlift. At home, smashed it. But then she comes to the barbell, doesn't feel as confident anymore. And the thing is, a lot of the time in that session there, I was just trying to remind her about the cueing that we think with the kettlebell and how simple it is. And when it wasn't feeling like the kettlebell, it's because you just haven't had that time under tension. You haven't had those reps on reps that you used to have when we was in person, say at Virgin, compared to where we are now. And the part of the cueing there was, I was trying to keep it as simple as possible and say to her, like, you just want to feel the same thing. And that's the thing, even though the barbell is slightly different, we want to be making sure we're kind of getting that same sort of feeling, because, as we talk about, we want to hinge. A barbell deadlift is just one tool to get that hinge, but the kettlebell deadlift is another. And the reason I wanted to kind of bring that one up is because I feel it kind of leads into a bit of lack of structured progression. Now, main reason for that is because when you're trying to progress through anything, you kind of want exposure to it. So the more and more exposure you have to that thing, you can then make sure that you get better at it. So when it comes to, obviously, as a coach, if you lack structured progression in anything, whether that's your training, your client's training, your development as a coach, it's really hard to measure your progress and make sure that you are progressing or not.
Yeah, I think this is one you see a lot, especially in the CrossFit space, where there's so much to work on and there's so many things to develop in your athletes that it feels like you're spinning plates. And obviously CrossFit, one of the key tenets is constantly varied. And that, I think, throws a spanner in the works against the traditional view of progressive overload. And I think that the key point I want to make here is that there still need to be some cornerstones of your training so that you can have objective and measurable progress towards your clients' goals. So whatever their goals are, whether it's strength, endurance, muscle gain, fat loss, you need to agree on the metrics that you're going to use to track them. So I actually had a chat with a new client yesterday who wants to get stronger. And like we discussed in our strength episode, for him, he wants to feel strong in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So the discussion centered around what movements are we going to pick to prove that you're getting stronger in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And we've basically come up with a weird version of a leg press, because for him, when he feels strong is when he's on his back in guard and basically kicking somebody off him. So we need to try and replicate that in some way that we can measure objectively, so that over time his hips feel better. He's had hip injuries in the past, and he can see that he's achieving the goals that we agreed at the start. Whereas if we'd not established that metric, we've not established the thing that relates to his end goal of feeling stronger in jiu-jitsu, then we could be training and doing all these exercises and it could all be fun and great. But 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 3 months later, we might have actually made no progress towards his goals. And I think that's a really common thing where it's easier to do that, but you're essentially hiding from the accountability from your clients. If they're paying you for a certain result, you need to be showing them at regular points along the way that they're getting their results. So are their numbers going up? If they're a competitive athlete, are their barbell lifts going up? If they're a CrossFitter, are their cardio scores getting better? And just having those baked into the program, I think, is an absolute essential. And you almost need to push back against a client's desire for variation, because they'll see other people doing different exercises. They'll see stuff on Instagram that they want to give a go. And I'm not saying there's no place for fun and variance, but your primary responsibility is getting them the result that they're paying you for. So you have to make the hard decision to say, no, we're going to stick with this boring exercise because that is the one that's going to get you the result that you're paying me for, and only bake in as much fun as is necessary, really, to keep the engagement high.
Yeah, I think that's key, because that's a part of being I'd say a good coach, good PT, is understanding how much fun that client actually needs, and then also getting it across to them to understand fun doesn't equal progress. Because fun, as I remember when we had Steve on, how Steve Fawcett, and he said about like the squat progression, and people were not necessarily feeling that great at the end of the cycle, because even though their numbers went up massively, they said, oh, there wasn't much change in the program. And it's just like, yeah, but that's how you get stronger at something. You do the same. And so, but something that I like to do within my training, and it's how I'm currently training right now, and how I have my strength focused days. I have a bit more volume focused day with some strength at the start, but then I have a movement variability day where I'm going to be doing exercises that are not, say, your normal, like traditional, say, bodybuilding strength exercises, but are going to benefit my other training as well. So like I'm utilizing, say some goblet Cossack squats, mainly for that lateral movement that I'm not necessarily I'm not heavily loaded, but I'm trying to also get a nice bit of hip mobility work. I'm going to try and strengthen my joints, strengthen my adductors, just because even though they're going to get worked in all my big movements that I do and all my normal accessories that I like to do, I like to then have one day a week where I throw in variations of things that either I like the look of and I'd like to try and give them a go, but I then commit to them for 4 weeks. That's the thing. It's like I picked, say, the goblet Cossack squat as an example, and I'm just doing this because it makes my hips feel really good. So I'm like, why not stick with this and then progress it, or keep it the same and maybe progress with reps over the 4 weeks, and then see, did that exercise help my squat? Did it make me feel stronger in squat? Did it help my knees? Did it help my hips? And having that variation with structure, I think is key, and that's it. You need to have something that you can stick to for a couple of weeks to see the effects, rather than changing week on week.
Exactly. You're kind of achieving both there, and that you get the variety and a bit of fun and like more of an enjoyment factor, I guess. But it does still relate to your goal, which is which is basically why you're training. And that's not to say that fun isn't a goal in and of itself, but just be aware of the trade-off for your client or your own training. I just remember had a chat with Mike Lee, who's coming on in a couple of weeks, and he had a great phrase that I really liked, was entertainment. Basically, some people just want to turn up and do what they think is training for fun, like pure fun. And I think everybody has their own requirement of entertainment. And like the super elite are completely happy, like Andre said in his episodes. I could do the most. I don't consider enjoyment. I just think what is the most effective for making me the best athlete I can be. Whereas somebody who is not competitive, like they might just turn up to any old class because they think it'll be fun and novel. And neither's right or wrong, but having an awareness of what your client likes and having the conversation with them to say, you've set these goals, we need to knuckle down here. We can't just be fanning around and doing loads of random like fun stuff that tickles our fancy in this day of the week. We actually need to have some discipline to stick to the most results generating exercises if you really want to achieve that goal. If you're not fussed about the goal, then maybe we can just have a laugh. But I think having that honest conversation with your clients is really important to say, look, this is the price for the goal that you've set. Yeah. Do you want it or not?
Yeah, and I feel like, especially when working in the city and you have an hour with someone, that they might be doing this because this is the best part of their day. They get out of the office, they get to have really fun, like get to spend some time with a trainer that they hopefully like and enjoy the time and actually feel better coming out of it. And something that I always found is, once you've kind of like primed the body and got you ready for the session ahead, and you've understood the person that's in front of you, you then have your structure. You have your progressive stuff that week on week they feel better, that they're progressing on, they feel stronger. Okay, yeah, I am getting better. And then say I like to break it up into thirds, and then in the last third is then where you have the opportunity to maybe do the fluff work, the pump work, maybe the boxing, or just something that might not be 100% goal specific, but it gets them somewhere closer. But they leave feeling either sweaty, they've got a pump, they just feel great, because it's that buy-in. So not only have you then got the structure of like they're progressively getting stronger towards whatever they're trying to get to, but they then leave feeling better. And you've also spoke to them at the start of the session and actually was like asking them about them. And a lot of times people don't get asked questions genuinely about themselves. Like, how are you? Just that. And someone's like, fuck, actually, I'm feeling a bit shit at the moment. And that's the thing. Sometimes just getting it off their chest and opens up into an even better session. And that's the thing is, I think it's so important that you remember, like, that's why I like the term personal trainer, because it is a personal trainer. I didn't like it when you got companies say, oh yeah, we're personal. But it is technically right. You're a personal trainer, so be a personable person with that person in front of you. So a bit of a tongue twister, but yeah. So
yeah, person. Right. Next one, on the theme of accountability, lack of accountability outside of the gym. I think this is one that I've fallen foul of in the past, in the early stages of my career. Training's going great, all the sessions are going well, numbers are ticking up, getting stronger, putting on some muscle mass, but not losing weight. I think that's a classic situation that PTs find themselves in. And you have a food discussion, you sort of give them some pointers, but actually, they're not really doing their end of the bargain. And having some sort of structure or agreement with your clients to check in regularly, whether that's weighing in, doing photos, doing body fat measurements, whatever it is, you're hiding accountability for yourself and for them, because obviously you have X number of hours with them per week, but they need to be managing the other 23 hours in the day, or how many hours outside of that in the week, to get towards their goals. So it could be as simple as a weekly weigh-in, or it could be checking in on their MyFitnessPal. But as we know, nutrition is a huge part of getting any training results. So making sure that they're on it is, if you're not doing that, you're doing them a bit of a disservice if their goal has a nutritional component to it. So I think, yeah, it's something that I definitely had in the past, and am now much more proactive in chasing people up on how they're eating and correlating their results to say, look, yeah, your weight's where we want it at the moment, or it's not changing. Like, let's knuckle down and actually be a bit more disciplined, because everything's going well in the gym, and the missing piece is you being a bit more, on it with your food.
Yeah, and I think also, even if you're not too clued up on nutrition and you're not too sure, recommend them a nutrition person to deal with, nutritionist. And it's like, obviously we discuss a lot of nutritional topics with PH Nutrition. You know, Ash and myself both, had spent some good time with most of their coaches and stuff like that, and know it's a great company of quality nutritionists that are really good at helping people of all walks of life. And I'm not afraid myself to now refer out, because that's their speciality. And I near enough most people that have a nutritional goal, I will always refer out and say, like, why not have a chat with these guys? I can obviously tell you most things you need and all the basics to get you going. But if you really want to get the most out of it, so we can work together, I think it's a perfect synergy of a relationship of the nutritionist and the say trainer / coach, to get the most out of your time, so you get the most bang for your buck. And so as a coach, I think it's important to be able to give your clients enough to get them moving and get them progressing. But when it starts to say slow down, or you're feeling that you haven't really got them to buy into you and your nutritional message, that might be then an opportunity for you to say, actually, why not have a chat with these guys? And I think this kind of that leads into a next point, which I kind of wanted to bring up, was us just doing too much too soon. And I think as a common coaching mistake, it goes beyond just coaching, and this also goes to then anyone starting a new gym routine. A lot of the time, it's just, let's do everything we can at the start. And so that's going to be if you're trying to lose weight, it'll be your training 4 to 5 times a week, your cardio, eating barely any food, doing all these things. And you're like, a couple of weeks later, I can't maintain this anymore. And it's like, why can't I? And it's the same thing when you're a coach. And it's like, when you get a new client, you want to give them everything. You want to say, right, I want you to get the most out of it. And what I realized, I realized this quite early on, was it's overwhelming. And it's just like, they're just like, fuck, I've just come to you to try and help me lose a bit of weight. I don't need to know like protein, carbs, fats, macros, like all this. I'm just like, I can't deal with that yet. Just what's the first thing I can do? And I think that kind of ties into the over-queuing stuff, because it's just like the start of anyone's journey needs to be as simple as possible to get the buy-in. And that is the number one thing, because you need them to get the best result possible in the shortest amount of time possible. There's only a couple of things you can really do in a short amount of time, and that's either make something feel better with movement. So like if they've got a bit of pain, you can kind of help them hopefully be pain-free in a couple of weeks, or at least be in less pain. And nutrition-wise, you maybe lose a bit of water weight, and hopefully you've guided them in a way that they will lose that initial weight loss that you get at the start of any type of training. So when it comes to those two particular goals, you need to try and think, like, what's the thing that can be the easiest win for everyone to get that buy-in, to then continue this journey of continue adding things on to get better. Because I think with everyone's so quick to take stuff away from their training or their nutrition rather than adding. And I know the PH Nutrition guys are big advocates of this as well. What can we do to add to your life rather than take away to get you closer to your goal, even if your goal is to lose weight?
Yeah, I think that simplicity point's really the key one, that you want to make it as easy as possible to get their results and not overwhelm them with too many things to work on at the same time. It's very related to the overqueuing, like you say. But I think the key principle behind these is keeping them in success. Like, you want to make it as easy as possible to feel like they're winning. So quick wins at the start, or just like the most bang for buck changes. And nutrition, I think, is the perfect illustration of this. Is like, what is the one thing you can do nutritionally to take a step towards your goals? Because if you look at some, like the average diet, there's probably 20 things which are not optimal, but there's probably one thing that's going to be responsible for 80% of the progress towards their goal. So it could be, right, we're just going to aim for getting X grams of protein per day. Forget everything else. Once that's a habit, then we can start to tweak and fine tune beyond that. But I think that principle for all of coaching really is, how can we give them the minimum information and focus points to work on to keep them in that positive momentum moving towards where they want to be.
Yeah, really, really true.
Good. Next one. The style of criticism, I'm going to say. I think this is a big one where, depending on probably your upbringing and what you've been exposed to in the past, everyone has a different preference for giving and receiving feedback. And I think the common mistake, I'd say, is just being overly critical and saying, you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong, don't do this, don't do that. And rather than focusing on what's wrong, I think focusing on what's right or what you do want to do, because again, it has that, it's received by the client or athlete as they're failing. If they're doing something wrong, they feel like they're fucking it up. Whereas if you say, right, that's good, but let's do this to make it better, then the feedback and the thing that they're going to focus on physically is the same, but the way that it's received is opposite. One caveat to this, actually, I've just thought of, is in that same chat with Mike Lee, he was saying he trained one of his mates, and his is more of a motivation style, but the tactic he would use is basically tell him he couldn't. I was like, oh, but you won't do that. You're probably not bothered enough. And basically setting the hurdles or setting the challenge for their client to overcome as if they couldn't do it was what really lit the fire under his arse, versus other people who would need encouragement and, you know, the opposite style of motivation. So I think being aware of how your message is coming across rather than just blurting it out as quickly as you can. And this reminds me, I had a squash lesson a couple of weeks ago, and the guy was an incredible squash player, but this is probably what prompted me to think of this episode topic, was just he bombarded me with about 20 different cues. It's like racket angle, like backswing, footwork, rhythm, timing. I just felt like I couldn't play squash. And when I was hitting the ball, I was thinking about so many different things that none of them were actually getting worked on. And I remember it just felt like a whirlwind of, maybe he was in a rush to sort of trying to show me as much value as possible. But I came out of the lesson like, I actually don't know what I should be focusing on when I go and practice now or when I go and play. And yeah, it didn't feel great to be told how shit I was at squash, basically. And that's why I don't want other people to make the same or do it in the same way.
Yeah, I think it's so important to make sure you understand the person that's in front of you and understand the type of, you know, technique cues that you might be giving or how to give it to them. And as you said, like with Mike Lee saying that you had to give it in a bit way of a challenge to someone else to kind of get them to go. And that's the type of person that I would be. You tell me I can't do something, I'll show you I can do it, and I'll show you I can do more. And it's like, well, everyone's a winner at that point until then I fuck it up. But the whole, I think it's the side of being understanding that person, right? And I think I like the way you put it at the start there, where it kind of depends on like how you're brought up, kind of how you take criticism and stuff like that. And for me, I think as I said, I like to be kind of told I can't do something, and I'll show you I can do it. But that can kind of then used to come across in my coaching to the point where, not I used to say it like that, but I used to be quite, how do you put it? But I'm very blunt.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you exactly how it is. And for me, that's always been my coaching style. And it still is, to be honest with you. I'm not going to sugarcoat. I'm not going to lie to you. Because anytime I tell you something, I want you to understand that I genuinely mean it. And I want so that's the coaching style. I guess that's that's not necessarily wrong, but it's not necessarily right. It's me as an individual. That's why I'm going to attract a certain type of clientele. You're going to attract a certain clientele. It's all the trainers. That's why there's so many coaches, because we all have different ways of saying the same message, and that's why this is. I think it gets a bit bad at times where everyone sees each other as competition, and essentially we are, we're all competing for the same market, right? But there are so many people wanting so many different types of goals, and also want different. They are different people, so they're going to want to interact with a different trainer / coach. So it's understanding that, and I think that kind of leads a bit into the next one, slightly, of being too nice. Yeah. And I think I could probably be a bit nicer, I guess, but I'm honest. I think it depends what you class as nice, right?
Exactly. I think that is the other side of the coin, where you could be blunt and risk hurting somebody's feelings, but at least you're moving them in the right direction towards their goals. Whereas if you're too nice and too understanding of, oh yeah, well, you weren't feeling great today, so don't worry that you didn't make any progress for the last 3 months, and I think you're stealing their results to protect their feelings.
Yeah.
And at some point you have to give them the honest message to say, look, I know you've been struggling to eat your food, but you haven't put any weight on for the last 3 months, and you say you want to put on muscle. So we need to change something, and we can change the training, maybe train less so that you go into a surplus, but I don't think you want to train less. So if you're serious about putting on weight, we need to get serious about eating more food, even though it might be uncomfortable or tough. And that's the honest truth. If it's not worth it to you, then that's fine. But I have to stand up for the reality of what's going on here, because if I'm too nice and too understanding, that you're not holding up your end of the bargain, and that's actually the reality of what's costing you your results, you are doing them a disservice, because they can then remove their own accountability from what needs to happen to get them what they want.
And I think it's also important to, not necessarily being too blunt, but sometimes being able to take a perspective on things. Like, for instance, if having this year just gone. So one of my clients, we was talking about training and his strength and how it's progressing, and he was just like, I was hoping to have been stronger at the end of this year. And I said to him, okay, so let's just write down every month of this year so far. This was back in September. So I wrote Monday to September, and I said, right, in January, what was happening? Okay, cool. So every single month we realized basically either going through promotion at work, breakup, new girlfriend, other stuff. There was so much going on every month. He had to miss training a bit because he was traveling. I'm like, look at this, and you're now still stronger. Look at everything you've got. This is why you're not stronger, and as strong as you was hoping.
Not even stronger, yeah.
Yeah, it's like not even so you're stronger, but and I'm just like, this is why. And sometimes this is the thing of a coach being able to say, look, let's take the step back. It's easy to forget about what's just happened, like the year, and you're just focusing on, say, the last 4 weeks, or why your 1RM hasn't changed. And this is that bit of it's being honest. And I think people respect honesty, and that's why being too nice can, as you said, you don't want to be too airy-fairy with it and make them feel like, oh, actually, he says, right, I haven't progressed this year. I'm like, no, you should be stronger, and I'm going to tell you should be stronger, and I'm going to tell you would have been even stronger if everything would have been perfect. But life isn't perfect, and it's not going to be that. Nothing is linear. Nothing is exactly that exact pathway. You're going to have the ups and downs. Weight loss is a prime example of that. Everyone knows from A to B isn't a straight line. It's a little graph that goes all over the place, because that's life. But that's the thing but then you need to frame it in a way where you're not just being a mean bastard to someone and you're telling them no, this is why, but also look at the progress you have made, and you highlight those wins, because that's the thing. It's the wins, as we mentioned earlier. That's the buy-in. And even as a client, do that as a task yourself. Think about your year just gone. Think about what some main events happened every month, and maybe nothing happened in a month. And then think, okay, cool. Why am I maybe where I'm at, or why am I not where I wanted to be? And it's just that review process. And I think as a PT with a client, and you, especially long-term clients, you need to have these like chats with them. Because when you're
Yeah.
long-time clients, sometimes their goals become very jaded because they've been with you such a long time, and it's a continual progression, and
Yeah, I
that's a
really like that.
good thing. So
Yeah, I really like that. I think that review exercise is a really powerful one that everyone should do individually and with their coaches as well. And that we always talk about correlating inputs and outputs, and inputs can be just food and training, but there are also lifestyle factors that have to be built in. So stuff going on in your work life, in your personal life, do all feature as inputs. So when you're reviewing your outputs in terms of training results, you have to consider those as well, because if you've got shit going on, they are going like that will impact how well you progress in the gym. And having the like realistic expectations of what's possible if you are going through major life events, it's not going to be as easy as when you're in lockdown with nothing else to do and all the time in the world to train and eat perfectly. That just like the body doesn't work like that. So I think that's a really nice way to structure it between a coach client interaction.
And I also want to make it just clear that that is not an excuse to give yourself leeway essentially on things. It's like these are not excuses that you've then had a lot of stuff on in your life, because it's the one thing I made sure I hammered home to him was I said you've made great progress because you've still turned up nearly every week. For the 2 to 3 times a week, he still kept turning up. I said, so the progress that you've made would have been nowhere near as much as if you wouldn't have kept showing up. And that's the thing. I think it's the expectations of stuff. And as a coach to client, making sure you are very clear. And so like we have this wide, and the problem with strength gain is and muscle building and all this stuff. Muscle building and strength gain, it's not as clear cut. You can't say you are going to have 20 kilos on your deadlift or you're going to have 5 pounds of extra muscle in 10 weeks. You just can't say that. You can't guarantee because you don't know. Fat loss, a little bit easier because relatively it's a bit more linear. You say, cool, in 10 weeks, we would hope to have lost between, say, 10 and 15 pounds as an example, using that because you can adjust things along the way. But when you're asking your body to do different things, that's either get stronger or add muscle mass, which is a tough thing to do, it's not as easy and measurable. So you have to make sure that the targets that you're discussing with each other are kind of like they are measurable. You have to find that clear point that you can both work to, that understand, okay, maybe we can't say you're going to be benching 200 kilos. Benching 200, well, you may never know. But you can't just say you're going to be deadlifting 200 kilos and you're at 150 now. Realistically, it's not going to happen in 12 weeks. But you can say, cool, what we can do, we can get you to say probably 160 there. We'll then aim to get to 170 there. So you're giving people a timeline of a rough goal. And that if you don't reach it at the end of that timeline, when you hit the review why.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's a good point. You can only manage your inputs. You can't manage your outputs. So if you want a certain output, what are the inputs that you can focus on? So being consistent in the gym, being consistent with the nutrition, those are things that you can control, and just keep your focus on those. Nice. Next one we have on the list is pushing your goals onto your client. This is another one where very passionate and enthusiastic coaches like doing what they like doing, and they kind of think that everyone should do the same. And everyone is different. Everyone has different goals, priorities, and starting points. Another key aspect to this. And I think there's obviously going to be some level of connection between coach and client for why the client has chosen that coach, because they like the way they do things. But I think your job as a coach is to get your client their goals and not your goals. So if you are a bodybuilder, but you've got a CrossFit athlete wanting to work with you, if that ever happens, you need to make sure that they're getting what they need to progress in their direction, not your direction. You might want them to go on stage, but that might not interest them. You might try to talk them into it because those are your values and your ideals, and that's not what they're paying you for. So I think making sure you're clear on where they want to go, and optimizing for that versus what you want for them, I think is a very important thing to do.
Yeah, they're suddenly doing more functional bodybuilding, and so here we go. Here's the middle ground, right? So I agree, and I remember doing that myself, like as a early doors PT, and even. But the thing is like I think on some respect that is obviously 100% right. You don't want to push your goals onto your clients. But I think I really like what you said there, is in like most clients will then work with PTs because they like the way they do things. So there is going to be a lot of similarities in maybe how you program or the type of styles of training that you're going to do with the clients. That's why they've come to you in the first place. They don't want to come to, as you say, you don't want a CrossFitter come into a bodybuilder thinking that they're a CrossFitter because that's what they put on social media, and then they get bicep curls and you're like, hang on a minute. What you portray, this is the power of social media, right? And what it looks like you're coming across. So I think it is really important to be very transparent in like kind of like how you program, and it's where you start to see. I think as a coach, I remember like back in the day, and when I went through like bodybuilding phase, powerlifting phase, I remember coaching people in that way. And I remember like doing doubles and triples with people and stuff like that. And I just shouldn't have been doing that. And it's like when I look back, I'm just like, yeah, I kind of fucked that up. But I've learned from that because I've been able to look back and understand why I did that and understand the influence. And at the time, I wasn't necessarily doing anything wrong per se. I just wasn't giving them the best for them. I was giving them the best that I thought was for them at the time because that was where my head was.
Yeah, spot on.
Another one, it's got to be, I think, especially when you start out, I think is a really easy time for this to happen is not having any boundaries. I think that's, I remember when you're early doors, you know, as I said a couple of points ago, and I said about giving too much too soon. And it's like you're giving them the macros, calories, you're giving them the training plan, like how to sleep, all this stuff. And they're like, cool, message me on WhatsApp, you know, and then you're constantly trying to help, you're giving them everything. And it's like, you then forget that outside of the gym, and like this is when you come in your time and you're still messaging and stuff like that. That's great. That's awesome customer service. But how long does that last? And you need to remember that there needs to be I guess expectations understood on both parts, and understand at what times. And I think a really good, after I saw you had it and it got me to get it, is a WhatsApp business account. And it's because then it says on there, cool, I will be contacting, you know, I'm available for contact between say 8 and 6 or whatever like that. And so people message you and they can expect a reply. And if it's outside of that time, it's very clear. And I think that's the thing. It's like, if you haven't told them that, they might be like, oh, why is he not getting back to me? Or something. So it can be very frustrating on both parts, I think, because then you might be getting annoyed at the client because they're messaging you outside of gym hours, but you haven't told them that. So
yeah, spot on. I think it's a function of the modern world where we're all online and contactable 24/7. And like you said earlier, personal training is personal. So you are investing in a relationship when you hire a coach, but it's an especially great challenge for coach-client relationships, because for most people who aren't professional athletes, it's their hobby. So it's what they're thinking about when they're not working, but it is your work when you're a coach. So managing that communication process, they'll be thinking about it in the evenings and the weekends most, whereas that's probably when you want to take your time off when you're the coach. So establishing some sort of rhythm or communication style that works for both parties is really important. So managing expectations for reply times or like when you're available. And I think my take on how this works in the modern day is, in the olden days, the burden used to be on the asker, the person initiating communication, to choose when they wanted to reach out. So you wouldn't phone somebody on their landline or go knock on their door late at night or on the weekends for something about work. Whereas nowadays, because of technology and like 24/7 contactability, you would message. Like I've had WhatsApps from people at like 1 a.m. on a Saturday night about like they injured their knee dancing or something, and
they're still drunk messaging you. You're like, this is a drunk message.
Yeah. And there's two ways to proceed that. You can get frustrated and be annoyed that they haven't thought that might not be a great thing to do, because I might be out at 1 a.m. dancing myself and I get a message about work, which isn't ideal. Or I think as a coach, you should take ownership of that and get the business number so that you can manage the receiving of the messages. So that's my take on it now, is that the burden lies on the receiver of communication to manage their boundaries of, I'm only going to check my work number at these times and I'm not going to look at it over the weekend, so I can switch off. And at the end of the day, it's in everyone's interest for you to do that, because if you are a coach and you're getting bombarded 24/7 by messages, you end up being very unproductive because you're always reactive and responding to messages and never actually working on their programs or developing your skills through education. But also you'll start to build a resentment towards your clients because you're like, why are you fucking messaging me at 1 a.m. on a Saturday night? Don't you respect my personal life? Whereas actually, once you have that separation, the boundary of this is work, this is leisure, then you can, everyone's happier and their expectations are managed. Of like, I don't expect an instant reply at 1 a.m. on a Saturday night. And I think the more transparent you can be about that with your clients, then everyone ends up being happier, and expectations are met rather than missed.
Do you know what? And I guess you could frame it in a slightly different way as well, and in a way kind of feel privileged that someone actually is thinking of you and saying, actually, do you know what? I want to message my PT because I've hurt my knee. And it's like, they're not even saying it out of a thing like, oh, I fucked my knee. And it's like, you, as you said, you can take it as a bit of like, oh, fuck, why are they messaging me? But you could always put it as in, oh, how nice. He's actually thinking of me at 1 a.m, half pissed, like with a butted knee. And he's like, oh, shit, what's my trainer going to think? And like, it's like, you can spin it. But as you say, I think the boundaries are key. Yeah. And the WhatsApp business, I got like a cheap SIM card from somewhere. I got that after I saw you do it. And then you said about it. I was just like, this is great because, and it was all on the same phone. So I don't need to have two phones. So any PT that hasn't got a business number, get one. I've still got a load of clients still on my personal number and I haven't transferred them across yet. And I probably won't. But new clients, I'm all about that new business thing because it's such it really makes such a difference. And also you can upsell your business on there, which is really, really good. I really liked one of the points you put out here. I'm going to skip to is stopping learning, because it is what you mentioned there, what you were discussing there. And you mentioned about obviously it takes away from that, and obviously learning and furthering yourself comes in times when you're not working. So if you do have a bit of essentially a bit of a blurred line between working and developing, the time for you to develop yourself, and also then downtime, it can be really hard to keep that passion up and keep that fire burning. And, for some people, it's, this isn't necessarily a passion of theirs. They're doing PT because they like it. It's not necessarily their passion, and they have a passion for other things, and that's completely fine. But sometimes you find that someone like myself, most things I do outside of work is either learning more about fitness and training, nutrition, all that stuff, or self-development stuff that can help that. I'm always thinking about ways that's to do with it. And it might sound sad, but that's what I thoroughly enjoy. And I want to be able to give it, it's the overkill all over again, isn't it? Giving as much as I can by learning as much as I can. But sometimes that's where you need to then actually stop and digest.
Yeah, I think, there's a few components to this, but I think what draws a lot of people to the fitness industry is that they have a passion for getting better in some way, shape or form. So it could be getting fitter, but it is very closely related to self-development just generally. The other thing I think is important to note here is that you're offering a service to your clients, and that service gets better through experience, but also learning. Like, your knowledge is essentially what is getting them their results. So if you're not upgrading your knowledge, you're not upgrading your service. And if we're looking to build a career in fitness, hopefully that career gets more and more successful, however you measure that, which means the service needs to get better and better and better. And I think some PTs sort of rest on their laurels. They think they've got it figured out, and they might have solved the problem. Say they're a fat loss expert and they've helped loads of people lose a lot of fat. They could just rest on the laurels and do that for the rest of their career. But I think if we're looking to better ourselves in some way, shape or form, it could be doing a business course instead of a PT course. Like, how are you going to progress over time? And how you're going to differentiate yourself in the market. And I think one of the common recurring themes between good and great coaches is that those great coaches have never stopped learning. They're always looking to improve in a dimension of their business, whether it is technical knowledge, they're doing specialist courses in certain areas of fitness, or they're looking to provide a better service by leveling up on the software that they use. Like, those are all different ways of learning that ultimately provide a better service to your clients that's going to show in the long term. And yeah, I think that's all I've got to say on it.
Do you have a mentorship or something like that starting up in January? Oh,
yeah, you just reminded me about that.
Oh, yeah. So could you just maybe dive a little bit deeper into this? This isn't a sales pitch, and this wasn't written. I think it's important because something that I love is seeing how other trainers that have been in the game for a long time can give back to the trainers, and I think that's something that you're very good at. Could you so the mentorship is? Could you give a little bit more information about it?
Okay.
In a non-salesy way. In a non-salesy way.
Yeah. Well, I guess the sort of context around all this is the reason I got into fitness in the first place. If you listen to episode 1, you'll hear the more awkward version of the story, but is that I'm passionate about movement mechanics, and I think that there's a big missing piece in the fitness industry for people who have niggles and injuries but want to train seriously. So the traditional rehab stuff basically gets people to a point, but it leaves a big gap between what's called rehab and full-on training. So with the mentorship that I've developed is aimed at coaches who want to understand movement mechanics at a much deeper level and how to work with the body to spot dysfunction or non-ideal movement mechanics, and how to then design exercises that can get people training more effectively. So that can be from an injury point of view, but also from a performance point of view. If somebody is struggling with a certain movement pattern, how can we learn to see exactly what's going wrong and then design exercises and programs to train them to perform better? And that's really the key phrase, is that it's training. It's very focused on training and how it integrates with any type of training. It could be bodybuilding, CrossFit, weightlifting, whatever. But that's sort of where my primary passion lies, and I want to grow that in the industry as more of a thing, because I think if I had that 20 years ago when I injured my shoulder playing rugby, then I probably would have forgotten that I even had an injury after about 6 weeks, whereas it plagued me for about 10 years. And I think if I can stop that happening for a lot of other athletes, I'd be really pleased.
Nice. And the reason why I wanted to bring that up was because learning for me had come in multiple ways, and like a lot of learning for me has come from trying different training styles, trying different training methodologies, seeing what it's like, because I'm someone that likes to be in the trenches and understand feelings. We touched on it last week when we were talking with Courtney, and I said how I loved dieting for the bodybuilding show to understand the stress of dieting to that level of leanness and understand all the things that I come across and all the common things that you might struggle with. And because if you can have empathy in that way, it can be a really good buy-in tool for the client, so they understand what you've been through. Same like with injuries, and you can say this is going to feel like this is when you're going to feel better, and it adds that buy-in. And for me, one of the most important people I'd say within my fitness journey has been a PT, Adam Madison, a listener of the podcast. And that's because he got me into strength training at the start, but it was more the thing of looking at how he trained clients and how he was with clients, and like the passion that he had when he was giving to others was why he was such a great personal trainer. And that's what rubbed off on me, because it was like I wasn't exactly how he PT'd people, but I looked at that like soul investment in that person. And one of the most frustrating things about people when they are like personal trainers, when they are working, and when I was in Virgin, you used to see a variety of different type of trainers, and when you see someone that's not really invested in their client, they're on their phone, or they're just like, even if their program's on the phone, it's just it just looks bad. And as a PT, when someone wants to work with you and you're in a commercial gym and someone wants to work with you, they're not just going to come up to you. Well, sometimes they do. Sometimes they just come to front desk, can I have a trainer to take me to there? But sometimes they're normally members and they're watching all the trainers. They're watching what they do, how they are. And that was always one thing. So even though Adam never necessarily mentored me, say like how you offer your mentorship, I still learned so much from either training with him or then also just watching him. And that's the thing, I think as a new trainer, you're a lot about talking and this and that and not listening as much. Whereas then watching as much, and like, but as I've gone into the industry for longer and I've been surrounded by more and more people, and like watching people like yourself, like watching how, or like you having assessments from you and watching how you've done things, like that's how I learn, because I'm a very practical person. And stopping learning, I think it's so sad when you see coaches that are resting on their laurels, and it's horrible to watch them. Not necessarily the deterioration of it, but I used to see a trainer who was a fat loss expert basically, and it was just his training methodology was just dated. And you could see that he knew what he was doing, and he wasn't expert, but he was just dated, and just like you could be giving that person so much more fun and actually getting them to their goal in the same way rather than using the machine for this and that. And it's just like, you know, you could be branching out, and I think that was where you get stuck in your own ways, and it can be hard to look outside that trench if you're stuck in it. So,
yeah, spot on. I think something you said there relates nicely to our next point with about Adam and how he was so absorbed in the session for his client, and I think that's only really possible if you're invested in their results, which is a lot easier if you like your clients. And I think the common mistake we've got down here is working with clients that you don't like. I think in the early days of PTing, when you're trying to build a business, you'll almost take any work you can get. And if we relate it back to the point you were making there about how you appear on the gym floor, people can tell that you're not enjoying training somebody that you don't like, and you're probably not going to give your best to them either. And it just, short term, you know, you make a quick buck from working with anyone and everyone, but actually you'll not enjoy your work. The client probably can pick up on that vibe that you're not really liking it, and anybody else in the gym can probably sense it as well. So I think that's definitely a big piece of advice I have for coaches starting out is, I know it seems like a tough decision, but if the fit isn't quite right, then it isn't worth it. You'll find somebody else. Like will attract a better, a better fit for your personality types. And don't be shy to say, I don't think this is going to work, because it's more honest and
I think that's key,
integrity.
100%. But I want to make it clear that when you're starting out, you do need to take these clients on, because you need to know what you don't like, and you also need to earn money. Because the thing is, sometimes you think, do you know what? I don't like to train with fat old men. I don't like to train fat old men that want to lose weight, right? And you actually realize, I get on really well with fat old men that are trying to lose weight, because they are just good lads, and they're really good. They go out on the weekend, but they progress, and you might actually find you talk well with them, and that's your business model, and you actually are a great person with that clientele. But because you had this misconception originally of, I don't like this type of person, you just don't know. And the thing is, until you've given, just like anything, and this is the beauty of a commercial gym, you get so many walks of life in them. And also how you portray yourself on the gym floor also can really rub off on the type of clientele you can take on. Now, I think back to how I looked like back in the day, a bit more of a skinhead, like, you know, just a bit bigger tattoos and stuff like that. I do wonder the message I was putting across, and also I was young and a bit obnoxious probably, but going to my client Sue, like, she would never have picked me as a trainer to work with, but because it was a commercial gym, she was given to me because she had an injury. It's like, this trainer will be a good person for you to work with. He's helped people like that, and he'll help you get through that. And she would never pick me, but she got with me, and she was like, oh, actually, he's all right. But that's because of maybe how I was appearing, and you know, she was a bit intimidated of the gym, is she didn't know she wouldn't like me yet, if you know what I mean. So she had this perception. So working with clients you like or you don't like, until you've been in the experience, you don't know either way. Don't judge a book by its cover. And that's kind of where I wanted to go with this, because sometimes the person you think you might enjoy training might actually be shit. And like you realize, and actually they're not bought into their sessions. And if you haven't got buy-in from a client, that's one of the hardest things, because you're trying your best, and as when that's your job to get them better, and you know they've not bought in. I think when what you said there about just being honest with your client and saying like, look, this isn't working, and I've said this multiple times to different clients over the years, and I've like, if it hasn't been working, I've said like, look, I've tried my best here. I really want you to progress, and if I'm not the right trainer for you, then I can definitely recommend you another trainer, because if you feel this isn't working, I don't want you to waste your time, and I don't want to waste my time. And this is not a relationship that's obviously going to grow. And if you're not invested, then that's cool. That's completely fine. You know, relationships aren't always going to be perfect, but I definitely can find you someone that you might get better on with. And don't be afraid to give business away to someone that you think might be a bit better.
Yeah. Spot on, mate. So I think we've done
About
X number of points there. Yeah, we'll count up and put it in the title afterwards. But I want to finish up with asking you a question. If you could go back in time to Rob Stubbs, just starting out as a coach, what advice would you give yourself?
Do you know what? I had a really good answer, because you obviously written it down and I've forgotten it. No, but what I would say, and when I do look back, is I don't want to give the blanket answer of I wouldn't change anything because it's made me into the man I am today. But yes, that is the truth. But what I would personally say is, I think to not be so single track minded at the start. And I think that's where I got lost at the start. It was, even though I was passionate about fitness, everything had to be to do with bodybuilding stuff at the time. Everything was bodybuilding, like how to train a client, how to eat, everything was that. And to be fair, say 10 years ago, that was kind of where the fitness industry was anyway. But it took me so long to kind of look outside of that at the time into actually there are other ways of training people, and there's other ways of doing things and helping people get towards their goals. And I think, especially nowadays where there is so much information and good stuff online that you can really, absorb and, put into practice, to make sure that try to maybe do it on yourself first, to not just, see something online and then give it to a client and think, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Maybe try an exercise that you see online, but understand the practical application of it. But yeah, I think maybe just to not be so single-minded, I think, to put it in one term. What about yourself?
I think for me, it would be just follow your interest, and that it sort of goes two ways in that it's sticking to your guns. So like I said in my little spiel about movement mechanics and the primary reason why I got into fitness, sticking to that, continuing to develop that, and working on that as my differentiator, and obviously something I find.
So the complete opposite of mine. So the complete opposite of mine. I'm saying, look around, try everything. You're saying, do one thing and stay with that.
No, so
I'm joking.
That's the one side of it, and the other side of it is that follow your interest in that, follow your curiosity. So along the way, I've had exposure to lots of different styles of training, which I've found interesting, and just like CrossFit, weightlifting, bodybuilding, like all these different aspects of fitness, and even like endurance training, I've found them interesting, and they've added to my service because I've developed expertise in them almost by accident. And I think the benefit of doing it both ways is that you're fueled by your own interests. So I love talking about those things with my clients, with anybody else, because I'm genuinely interested in them. Whereas I think the cynical way to do it would be to chase money and to just be like, where's the money at the moment? Where's the area of growth? And, fat loss is probably the biggest market in fitness. And I could have just been like, right, setting out my business, where could I make most money? But that doesn't get me as excited as all the things we've just spoken about. And eventually you'd end up resenting your work. Whereas I think I feel very fortunate in that the things I work in and talk about on a day-to-day basis are things that I'm actually fascinated by and love talking about. And I think that's, a great position to be in, because I think a lot of people in their jobs hate talking about work outside of work. Whereas to a point, I'm always happy to talk to people about anything sport and fitness related.
Unless it's like, how can I lose weight while they're drinking a beer and eating a curry? You're like, well, it's funny you say that, because I feel it's kind of, so just for listeners' appreciation here, we didn't discuss what our advices would be prior to the podcast, because I kind of wanted to hear as a genuine response. And I think it's funny how we both have it's very similar. And it is when I said about being like, trying not to be one track minded, and it's because I've been so grateful for all the different experiences that I've had across fitness to see what I've enjoyed and what I haven't enjoyed. And also the way I like to train is, if I'm really shit at something, become good at it, or at least be better than most. And for me, that has then meant whenever I've had a client come to me and they maybe say, I've been trying to think about this, I can say, I've had an experience in this before. This is what I found. Definitely give it a try, or maybe try doing it this way. That's my experience. Have your say. But I think as a trainer, as you said, the chasing the money thing, and I used to train people for fat loss and stuff like that, and as you say, it just didn't get me going like it does. Like, so when I like to train people for strength and muscle gain, because it's what I enjoy. And it's taken me 10 years, and this is the thing, to kind of get that message across to everyone, that that's kind of what I enjoy, because I love that style of training, and I love helping people get stronger and get bigger. But sometimes it can be misportrayed on social media, where it's, I think, a whole thing in itself. Because when I went through a bit of an endurance block and training for a triathlon, he doesn't know what he's doing now, what to do with strength training and stuff. It's like, no, I'm just trying a different style of training. But yeah, it's I think sticking to being a better trainer. I think progressing to becoming a better you is great. But so I hope you enjoyed today's episode. It's been a bit more of a I don't know, it's been like a bit, not a rambling, but it's kind of been like a cool conversation. I really enjoyed it, because I think we both have, for the amount of time we've both been in the industry, I think we both have such a passionate outlook on the industry and ways that we would love to help the industry. And I know you obviously do a lot working with different coaches through Gymbox as well and stuff like that. So it's cool. So you're getting to help new trainers coming in. And when I was a head coach, that was one of the parts I loved about that role, was helping trainers become better coaches. And, surround yourself with like-minded people. So hence the podcast. So thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate you listening to this podcast, and hope you managed to get some bits out of it. If you did, we would love you to share it online. As always, share it with a friend, share it with a coach, or even share it with your coach and say, yeah, maybe listen to some of the points in there and you might want to take note of. But as always, if you do want to leave us a review, you can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And if you want to support the podcast, head over to YouTube and subscribe, and all the other good stuff. Go to the website, lungeandlift.com. I don't know what else, but thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys.